I, on behalf of my partner Mary here and I, and she'll have a chance to introduce herself in a moment, welcome to the first session of the last day of this incredible conference. My name is Betsy Sirk. I'm with NASA. And last I checked, I direct government-wide strategic initiatives, as well as I've been told now, let's call it 508 because that is a real legit law as part of the Rehabilitation Act. That is not going away. I never ever thought that that would, elicit any type of applause because it is kind of crazy in this environment. But we use the term digital accessibility because we really, really want the focus to be on making information and communication technology accessible. And often we're dealing with audiences that are beyond the federal government audience. Who knows, that there are more state and local governments, there are more industry representatives, there are so many people out there. And digital accessibility really addresses that experience with technology and electronic communications. And that's a big piece too. So we're not just talking about the hardware, software, but all of that. So I'm honored to be able to do all of that. I run different government-wide things, and again, we're going to get to that later. But I'd like to turn it over to my partner in crime here, Mary, to introduce herself and what she does before we get into our presentation.
My name is Mary Craig. I'm the Chief Information Officer at the Washington State Department of Services for the Blind. And as I've been teasing Betsy this week, I'm from the better Washington. When our new governor came in, one of his first speeches, he talked about Washington State values. And Washington State values DEI, and I would say Washington State values accessibility. I'm incredibly excited to be here to share the story of our collaboration. Our story is really a CSUN success story.
Thank you so much, Mary. And also, before we get into our content, I'd like to introduce you to Owen Chung, who, if those of you had the pleasure of happening upon Owen and I gave a presentation in this room a couple of days ago about the digital accessibility gap between college and the workplace. And he was one of my stellar NASA interns, pun intended. And a couple of years later, when he graduated just last year with a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from, let me get this right, College of Mary Washington in the great state of Virginia. He was hired as a full-time digital ICT accessibility specialist, and we're really, really proud that we offer that opportunity. It's a contractor position, but we really value this, and just glad to have him here, and he has supported us in putting together the proposals to where we are today, so thank you for running that. Yes. So we originally were not given the honor of being in a time slot that afforded us a full hour. So what we're hoping is that we, A, can either entertain you with stories, or B, give you a lot of time for questions, and then C, hope you really do have questions. So we're gonna try to see what we can do here too, but we really do want this to be interactive and you to get as much out of it as what our collaboration has given to us. So this is not detailed, hard technical content. This is really about the story and what our takeaways are. And we're also going to share along the way what we've accomplished lately and what we're looking forward to from both of the perspectives. So when we talk about Washington, D.C., we're just saying the home to most, or at least the current home to most of the federal government. So I'm just in general not singling out a particular agency, even though I am from NASA, I run some government-wide programs. So this is just more on behalf of our collective experience in that area. Our offices, Owen and I, we work in Greenbelt, Maryland, next to the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. And that is NASA's largest center, for those of you that are unfamiliar. Usually, one thinks NASA headquarters is the state that happens to have a NASA center, like everybody in Florida thinks the Kennedy Space Center is headquarters, and maybe it will be next month, who knows. Everybody from the Houston area thinks that the Johnson Space Center is the NASA headquarters. These are all very important installations. The Goddard Space Flight Center has focused on science missions like the Hubble Space Telescope, the James Webb, the PACE mission that's now circling the Earth and monitoring atmospheric conditions and actually biology in the ocean, which is super cool. We're getting all of that information in. So there are lots of things going on. And thank you. Our tax dollars within the federal government at work, the NASA budget has remained less than half of a cent to the dollar that you spend. So thank you, everyone. It may seem like a shameless plug, but I'm a proud civil servant who has spent her career over 4 decades since I was an intern in Owen's position, really trying to get effective use not only of the federal dollar, but showing the benefits to humankind of what we are doing. And the collaboration is a key part of that story. Please feel free to come up at the end. If you want to leave early and you're bold enough to come grab some NASA swag that I have at the end of the stage, right down here, please do so. I'm sure you would have a good reason for exiting what's going to be our riveting presentation. You're staying now. That's pretty cool, and we haven't even gotten into the content. But seriously, we've got some cool little mission stuff and stickers at the bottom of the stage, so please feel free to come take that. So the collaboration is the heart of the story. I will give you some updates. And as most of you know, it's a challenging environment now, but we are continuing to do the good work that the law is driving us to do. And also we're finding the power in collaboration with other agencies. So I'll be talking about that. Mary will provide you some highlights of what she's been able to spearhead within the state of Washington that is phenomenal, with the hopes that we learn from other municipalities, what they're doing, but also if you can take away anything, even if you're in industry, if anything we say resonates with you, please use it, because we use your stuff all the time. So that's what this is about. And then we're highlighting what we think some key takeaways are, and again, lots of time for questions, unless, of course, I continue to riff like this and use up all of our time. So next, please. A lot of words here. The federal CIO had established years ago an accessibility community of practice as a government-wide entity to promote Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. And just to clear this up, that law, that part of the Rehabilitation Act, it applies to federal agencies directly and only. It does not drive industry to do anything. It doesn't drive non-federal government entities to do anything. However, once standards are set that are good, robust technical standards that define accessibility, I encourage everyone to not reinvent the wheel, but to see what's out there and understand it. So what does Section 508 say? It says federal agencies shall buy, build, implement the most accessible technology that meets its needs for its workforce, its people, its employees, and for the public that needs its information and services. So that's a pretty big scope. So we feds are on the hook to ensure that that law is being followed. And you know what? This isn't something that, oh, okay, it's a statute, let's just follow it because it had some purpose then. It actually promotes better design, better technology, better usability for everyone. So it's not like we're doing something just because it's a law. This is the right thing to do. And what does the industry outreach program mean? Well, under the accessibility community of practice, we actually have 3 subcommittees, if you will, or different focus areas. One is on best practices. It can be very technical or it could be general in the way one communicates. One is on education and outreach. And then the third, and my favorite, is the one I lead, which is industry outreach. And the reason I'm so passionate about the industry outreach piece is there are very few people that are focused on doing this. They just assume, oh, industry is aware of what this law requires. They're aware of what the technical standards are. Everybody's following it. Everybody's making an accessibility conformance report that details the accessibility of their product. I mean, duh. Well, no, it's quite the opposite. There's so much misinformation out there, and I think the biggest cause, and as a Fed, I take responsibility collectively for this, is inconsistent communication and inconsistent application/enforcement of this law that has resulted in widespread industry confusion. But why, again, is this so important to me, and I think to everybody? We buy much more COTS, commercial off-the-shelf software, hardware, solutions, than we build internally. And NASA is a big developer, don't get me wrong. We do actually do a lot of innovative development. What do we make our software developers do? Well, they have to do their own accessibility conformance report to say, how does this meet the standards before we implement it in NASA? And then if it's released to the public, we make sure they have that report. But that's just one example. There are many other federal organizations that actually do computer work as well. But the vast majority is the acquisition, the buying of COTS products. So the industry that we're all talking about is generally the same. We are part of a lot of international consortiums and groups where we're talking about engaging with particular companies. And the more consistent our message can be from country to country, the better. And guess what? Mary will talk to you too about her acquisition challenges and things at the state level. It's the same thing we're facing. So we all are in this together, and I think it helps industry. So that's what that program is. Digital accessibility programs throughout NASA. They have large centers, and I've been serving as the Section 508 program manager at the Goddard Space Flight Center, which is closest to where, even though we are NASA headquarters, we are located in that office in Maryland, and we're very happy to and thankful that we have an office out of which we can operate, because when you're mandated to go back to an office, it always helps when you have one. And that is a struggle right now. People that are trying to find that we're fully working remote, and others that there's just not the space. And so that's a big change. The other thing I do is we call them strategic sourcing initiatives, but these are government-wide programs. In the case of the workstations, desktops, laptops, it's our end user computing devices that people use across the government. Over 10 years ago, the Office of Management and Budget mandated that we should do this in a more consolidated, standardized way, because there's no excuse for a particular federal agency paying double what another is for a similar laptop. And so this initiative has been really effective in not only cutting money and spend in this area, but also in the communications and transparency, because the large manufacturers of desktops and laptops, as well as the key processor companies, have been involved with us every year, not only reacting, but giving us their insights to industry trends. Because that's the one thing about COTS. It doesn't wait to get your specific detailed requirements. It builds what it thinks the world needs, or what they think the world will buy, and you take it from there. So often we're looking at, is what's available off the shelf what meets our needs? So I run that particular initiative, and took the opportunity 10 years ago to say, if any government customer, and that's who buys, and it's actually every single federal agency buys off of one of the contract vehicles we have. We have one within NASA called NASA SOUP, Solutions for Enterprise-Wide Computing. We have partners at the General Services Administration that have various schedules and blanket purchase agreements. And we have at NIH, we have an acquisition program called NITAC. Apologize, I'm gonna get that acronym wrong. It's not mine, it's theirs, but it's just the program through which you can buy. And the Army had a program that is currently referred to as CHESS for their computer hardware. I think it's going through a renaming, but these are all legit authorized government vehicles from which any federal government entity can buy. So when we're all in partners together to set the same minimum standards, when the companies are selling through these multiple vehicles, that transparency I referred to is really driving the prices down, and it's allowing choice by the government customer to be as effective and efficient as possible. I also run a federal mobility acquisition group where we've defined what is this federal mobility stuff, because there's a lot in there. It's not just your devices, it's mobile device management, how we go about securing them, all of the aspects of it. So there's a cool government-wide team there too. And again, I mentioned, we're calling this Washington, even though NASA headquarters is in Washington, D.C., we're in Greenbelt. And that is our background in the program. And again, it's just an honor to be able to get to this audience. But back to, I'm sorry I didn't close the point, I think, of with the government-wide strategic solutions as desktops, laptops, we had an opportunity to infuse initiatives that we want promoted. One is sustainability. So we have the EPEAT Eco label. They're going to be the highest level of sustainability, but we also guarantee and pre-screen for 508 compliance. So any government customer coming in to buy one of these desktops or laptops, they know there is already an accessibility conformance report produced for that and that the product is compliant. So apologize for not making that connection before. I want to encourage everyone that works in an area where they're collaborating with others. Even if you think the two things are unrelated, take the opportunity to infuse, hey, I can drive accessibility here by putting this requirement in. You know, there are other government laws and acts and things that we need to follow as well too, so it's related to supply chain and security and trade act agreement, but putting in what you can up front is great. And I'll turn it over to Mary.
Thank you, Betsy. My mic is on. Just go ahead. Issues with the headshot. So I got my introduction to the accessibility arena in the mid-90s. I worked for a network consultant company in Olympia, Washington, and we supported a variety of public and private sector companies. And I came into the Department of Services for the Blind as part of that network upgrade project. And I had no experience working with any blind individuals. I went out for coffee one morning, probably my first week working that contract, and I met a blind woman. We had a great conversation, and she came into where I was working a little bit later and said, Mary, my computer was upgraded, and I can't figure out how to get into my email. Can you help me? And I went, I don't know. I went in there and I clicked around with the mouse, and JAWS was speaking to me, and I was lost. Trying to figure out how do I show her how to navigate in this system. And the IT manager walked by, she poked her head in and she said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm trying to show her how to get into her email. She said, well, you can't do it that way. She took away the mouse, she turned off the monitor and said, now show her. I was lost. And, but I was intrigued. I was incredibly intrigued by JAWS. I was incredibly intrigued by how blind individuals use their computers. And so I went home that night and I learned keyboard commands. And that propelled me and my interest into accessibility. And I became an AT expert and started, when I wasn't doing my network jobs, I would do accommodations for Department of Services for the Blind clients. And I loved it. It was a lot of fun, but the network jobs paid a little bit more. So I was doing those in my spare time. And then eventually the Department of Services for the Blind said, hey, Mary, we're spending a lot of money on this company you work for. Why don't you come to work for us? And that was 1999, and I have been with the Department of Services for the Blind for over 25 years now. To say I believe in the work we do is an understatement. I have a lot of incredible colleagues. I've learned so much. I'm constantly learning. And I really am excited to be able to share some of what we've been able to accomplish in Washington State. I'm also vice chair of the Information Professional Management Association, and this is a nonprofit unique to the state of Washington. And it was created over 60 years ago by two IT guys. And the intention is, or the mission of the nonprofit, is the training and development of the Washington State IT workforce. And I kind of landed on the IPMA board fatefully. They had an opening, and my agency didn't have funding for me to go to an event. I volunteered, I got to know the board members, and then I was invited to join the board. And I've been on the board for about 5 years now. And then I created, through that work, I created an accessibility conference titled Accessibility Matters, and that's held every October. I'm going to talk more about that later. I've worked on the state's accessibility community of practice and the accessibility advisory group, and I'll talk about that on a later slide. And then I also was a participant in the development of our new Washington State accessibility policy. So this is
Yay, okay, hey, feel free to applaud whenever, we're not gonna hold up any signs, but that's, hey, way to go.
Well, and why Betsy and I are here today. 4 years ago, I was allowed to attend my first CSUN, and I happened upon a session by Betsy. And then I wasn't really stalking her, but I kept running into her. It worked out really well. And we kept in contact and developed a really good friendship, and she has been a great resource for me. She's done a lot to further my knowledge and to further my my ability to understand that I can make a difference. I can do stuff, and she has been really a great mentor to me in that.
I really appreciate that, Mary, because as we will hopefully bring home for you on our key takeaways, that is what we think is the most important. We have no idea who we're touching with our presence here and what we're saying, what we're not saying, until somebody inadvertently comes up to you later, hey, I remember when you talked about XYZ. And if they're saying it to me, I smile because I don't want to say I have no recollection of what you're talking about. I pretend and I go along, and then maybe I am reminded that it could have been a little nugget, but that's how I've advanced in my career, is taking those things, taking those experiences, and then they come to light in a certain situation. So it's great. But Mary, when she first heard me talk, I think that year, I usually give a couple of presentations a year out here. And it is a lot. It's a process. I mean, those of you who haven't been a presenter before, I encourage you, your story is going to be really, really important, and you would never know who it's going to reach, but it is rigorous. It's, I guess, because CSUN is an academic institution, I felt like I was back in college writing a proposal for a grant or something, and then the word counts. It's almost as bad as if you're helping a kid write a scholarship. I mean, like, make the word count, right? But there's a lot to that, but it also forces the discipline of you to think about, what are your key points? Who's your audience? What do you want them to take away? So I believe the topic was ensuring accessibility, digital accessibility throughout the acquisition lifecycle. And there was probably some other specific industry outreach thing. And Mary works for the state government as a CIO in one of the state agencies. Even though they are not mandated to use the technical standards, Section 508 of the Rehab Act, there's so much similarity here. And I thought that it was intriguing and wonderful, because I always collaborate with federal colleagues and industry because of the nature of my position. But to see the possible impact for state and local governments, I thought this was fantastic. So not only did we talk about this, and Mary talking about her newly forming and getting publicized Accessibility Matters, which is great because it's a double entendre. So that's the other takeaway. Anytime you can make a double entendre or a pithy title, unless it's The Tale of Two Washingtons, then you can, catch somebody's interest. Either that or they'll look the other way, but they probably would look the other way anyway. You're trying to draw them in. But I love that, Accessibility Matters, and who she brought together. So I was honored to speak at her first conference, and not only speak, but I was part of a panel. And it was really cool to be representing a different take on something and hearing the story of the people largely from Washington State. So while I could share with Mary what's available in terms of accessibility laws, policies, practices, I was equally as intrigued as she was to hear what she's able to implement within the state. And then in addition to that conference, speaking at that conference, Mary set up a virtual meeting. Yes, we can accomplish work virtually on a computer screen, believe it or not. We set up that meeting with her colleagues, other CIOs from other state agencies across Washington, and that was fabulous because I was there to do answer any questions. And one of the takeaways I think from that is there's some low-hanging fruit when it comes to digital accessibility. Don't start on really complex software or complex communications. Look at your hardware first. There's fewer technical standards that define digital accessibility for hardware. Does Washington State use accessible hardware? Do you assess that? Do you have reports for the hardware that you have? I mean, it's just a simple thing, but Mary could check into that right away. That's just an example. And this continues. I am so proud of her and what she's accomplished within that state. And no matter what challenges we face across the federal government, those doing this federally mandated law work that has not been repealed, again, repeat that, this is still valid. And it's really great to get the collaboration going on not only what it is we should do, but how should we go about doing it. It's kind of like crowdsourcing, but we're all built in the same general community. I did have something on there about international partners. I don't want to gloss over that. Our friends from Canada, Shared Services Canada, I believe chairs this meeting, started a group several years ago that really was looking at not just laws and policies within the different areas of Canada and the United States. We also had UK representatives, and I think more recently we've had Australia join. But it's industry outreach and industry engagement. And of course, that got me really excited because, hey, if we're talking to, as an example, Microsoft, it's the same Microsoft regardless of your country. So let's talk about consistent messaging and asking them to engage with us on certain things and accessibility initiatives. They've continued that effort. And this past year, worked with several companies. Now, we chose the companies to just reach out to based on the fact that it wasn't just Canada, or it wasn't just the US, or it wasn't just another part of the UK. There was some common thread through here. So it could be a major utility in one country, but used maybe in a minor way in another country. But we not only ask them the question about their products and services, we ask them about, internal to their company, what are your digital accessibility initiatives? Do you have something similar within your company to the way the federal government is mandated to buy the most accessible tech for its employees and for the members of the public to use their products and services? Do you have something? I thought that was extremely valuable insight as to how are they treating their people. And they could be the world's largest company, they could be a small niche company, they could be scientific, they could be general business. It doesn't really matter. It's like, how do you value this within your company and demonstrate that? So that was really cool information. The updates for this year, and again, everybody knows the challenging environment that we're under right now, and there is a lot of stress. So if you do run into another Fed like myself, please be a little gracious because we may have our last nerves worn. You don't know what's going on. It's kind of crazy, and that turmoil affects everybody. But just if you can give people the benefit of the doubt, I am honored to have a couple of colleagues here that were able to travel, but I will say the majority of the US representatives from the federal government had their trips canceled to here. So we're just really, really honored to be able to be here and to collaborate with you because this good work needs to go on. And it's much easier when we have all of you. So anyway, our industry outreach program, we did get to expand it by having more federal agencies involved. And we are prioritizing what our initiatives are, but we largely do engage with industry to help them better understand what we're asking for with Section 508. And we call it the win-win situation because I've still not met a company that wants to sell to less people. Wait, my standards, I'm not meeting these standards or whatever. Oh, and you're saying it might be actually easy to meet the standard? I don't care, I've got enough market share, thank you very much. I don't think that happens. You know, people want to know how to make their product better, and they have a choice. The product developer has a choice whether to do it or not. But if you are aware, hey, I've got to go in and do a bug fix to my version, 2.x, maybe I can fix this accessibility issue. It could be a WCAG, an international standard, or it could be a 508 specific standard, but maybe I can do it. And it just gives you, knowledge is power. It gives the company an opportunity. It just makes good business sense. So you talk about effectiveness and efficiency. There's no carrot and a stick here. I can guarantee you a company that sold to the federal government and said, I've never been asked for an accessibility conformance report before, even though this law has been around for 25 years-ish, I've never been asked. They're not lying. That's been their experience. Now, there could be legit reasons why a federal government organization was not asking for that, because there are some exceptions built into the law that only the federal government can claim based on how it's going to use the product. One pretty common one is that ICT, information and communication technology, that you're acquiring incidental to a contract. For a contractor to use, there are no civil servants interacting with it. That doesn't have to be accessible. I mean, it's great if it is, because I always say, hey, get that report and know how close you are anyway, because what if a civil servant is then assigned responsibilities? Say the contract goes away, and that's also happening right now too. Consulting and support contracts are going away. All deliverables are still required to be accessible per this law, but there is a valid exception. Well, industry can never claim exceptions, so they shouldn't even care about that. They should do what the federal government asks when they ask to provide a report. The problem is the inconsistent asking of the federal government. So that's one way where we're trying to bring this together. And again, continuing the collaboration with the countries that I mentioned is just key. And if our Canadian friends are ever willing to travel down and meet with us, I know there's several here, that we love that. We want that to continue because it's easy to get different perspectives together. And that is the most of what I can share. Those of you who were lucky enough to see Lady Feingold's presentation yesterday, she highlighted what her crystal ball was telling her about the next few years in the US federal government about new laws being passed. The good guess is 0, okay? The other good guess or assumption is that we don't know about enforcement. I mean, it's still a law and we're going to do what we can because it is legit. But we can't predict that. All we know is we're going to continue to do the good work that we've been doing here and continue to collaborate and do it in the most cost-effective and efficient way. And by the way, you're looking at one or less than one person dedicated to running these kinds of digital accessibility functions for most federal agencies. That's pretty dramatic. And we're talking about the whole scope of digital accessibility, from acquisition to content creation to implementation. You know, we're not talking policy right now. If an agency has a policy, that's great. But we're really talking, are you ensuring that that letter of the law is being followed in the Rehab Act? Are you at least looking at what you're buying for technology for your people to do their work in the workforce to ensure that it's the most accessible it can be? And if it's not fully accessible, are you providing equivalent tools, equivalent access to the information? And this is not only for the federal employees, it's for the public who needs to get to it. So while you may not need to go to a NASA website to get the same type of information as, say, you would through Social Security, where you critically, I need to find out what my money is, or a Treasury Department, and whatever the case may be, that is publicly available information that needs to be accessible, and you have a right to it. So I'm just saying it comes from those two prongs, and they're equally important, really, enabling your workforce and enabling the public to consume the information. So I am proud of those efforts, and I'm proud of my colleagues who have dedicated their lives, like me, to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollar, because that is what it's about. Do it as efficiently and effectively as possible, and having forums like this help us accomplish that with such few numbers, such little numbers. So anyway, back to you, Mary. This is going to be super cool. Just think about a couple of years ago, Mary's just kind of getting these ideas starting, and now look what she's done in just that short period of time. And talk about your logo too, because that's super cool.
No pressure, Betsy.
No pressure.
Well, I'm incredibly excited to talk about everything that's going on in Washington State. Now, as I've mentioned, I'm old and I've been around a while in the accessibility arena. 20 years ago, I went to a meeting of IT leaders in the state of Washington, and I was talking about the need for improved accessibility, not just externally, but internally. And I had a large agency CIO say, in the most patronizing voice possible, "Well, Miss Craig, I understand accessibility is important to the people you support, but I don't have any blind employees. Why do my systems need to be accessible?" To which I responded, "Well, if your systems are not accessible, you will never have blind employees. That is why your systems need to be accessible." And I will share that some of my colleagues, there was no response to that, by the way. I will share that some of my colleagues came and patted me on the back afterwards, because here I am, a small agency CIO, and here's someone who is in a position of power, and I kind of felt like I put him in his place. It felt good. I often talk about how in Washington State, the stars have aligned. And I say that because we have a great governor. We just had a governor's race, and our new governor, when he gave his first speech, talked about the importance of Washington State values. And in Washington State, we value DEI. And I would say that is equally, we value accessibility. About 2 or 3 years ago, we got a new state chief information officer, the head of IT for the entire state, Bill Kehoe. Bill actually came from LA County. He had started in Washington State, but he came down to LA County, which is the largest county in the United States. I did not know that. But it speaks to Bill's brilliance. And I say he's brilliant because he is the first state CIO that after he joined the state, I met with, and I talked about accessibility, and he looked at me and he said, "I understand why accessibility is important." That was a wonderful day for me. He said, "You know, when I was CEO at King County, which is the Seattle area, I hired a blind chief information security officer, and he was brilliant. Ralph Johnson came down to LA County when I moved down there because he was so good." And then he said, "Don't tell anyone, but I'm trying to recruit him for Washington State." And I am excited to share that the Washington State Chief Information Security Officer, Ralph Johnson, is legally blind and is at the highest level of IT governance in the state of Washington. He's also a really good friend of mine. So when I came to CSUN the first year, I was on that nonprofit board, and I had been running these small accessibility events. But after coming to CSUN and learning and watching, I thought I could do a small conference. And that was when I created the Accessibility Matters conference that first year. And I was really lucky because I brought NASA to Washington State. Let me tell you, if you want to get recognized or noticed in your state, get NASA to come visit and meet with your state CIOs. It was awesome. I also had the Amazon state rep totally hooked me up. I got Peter Korn, who is head of accessibility at Amazon, at my conference. There were a lot of amazing speakers, and I would say that a lot of the amazing speakers were Washington State accessibility advocates. It was just incredible to bring people together and to find a community. These are my people. These are the people who want to help make Washington State more accessible. My second year at CSUN, I met some staff from the state of California, and I learned that California has an amazing accessibility community of practice. So I went back to Washington State, and I was chatting with the state CIO, and I said, I have a dream. I would like to create an accessibility community of practice. And he said, tell me more. What does this look like? And I said, I think it could start with just a simple Microsoft Teams site. And he said, you know, Mary, I think I could create this for you right now. And today we have over 250 members in that accessibility community of practice. And we've brought together this great synergy of people who are working to make their agencies more accessible. I also pulled together some of the accessibility advocates that I knew and created an accessibility advisory team. Larry Watkinson, who is a great friend and mentor of mine as well, joined that group. And it goes back to the nothing about us without us. And so I wanted to ensure that we had a variety of people in that group representing people with disabilities. And that team has been amazing. And now that we've built up the community of practice, we are planning all these training sessions throughout this year. I believe we have a training session every other month to help educate the state workforce, to help educate developers on what it means to develop accessible content, to ensure that state agency websites meet the requirements of Title II, that they're accessible, that their mobile apps are accessible. We also have taken it a step further with the revision of the state accessibility policy. And I have to tell you, this policy was so exciting for me. When we were developing the policy, I had in the back of my head the person who worked on the first policy. And they said, you know, this was all I could get through. This was all I could get them to approve. It was really minimal. And so as we were working on this, we asked for everything. And I was like, hey guys, do you think we're asking for too much? And they said, no, ask for everything. Let them tell us what we can't have. And so we asked for everything. And we had a lot of support. And in the state, there's a process for policy approval. First, it goes to the Technology Management Council. Those are the state CIOs. Then it goes to the Business Management Council. Those are the assistant directors in charge of the business side of the house. And then it goes to the Technology Services Board. And that is vendors of the state, think leaders from Microsoft, Boeing, Google. I'm not actually sure who the members are, but that gives you a representation of who reviews the policies before we put those in place. I was incredibly excited when it passed the Technology Management Council with just 3 people voting against it. But I was curious, why did 3 CIOs vote against this accessibility policy? So I reached out to some of my peers and I identified 2 of the people who had voted against it. And I was kind of surprised. One of them was an accessibility advocate himself. So I was like, help me understand, where are the issues? And so before taking it to the Business Management Council, we met with those CIOs to address their needs. For example, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, they have a ton of data. A lot of it is scientific data. And there was concerns of, well, if we have to go back 50 years in data and ensure that all that scientific data is accessible, that is an incredible task and would take a lot of resources. So he said, what about archived data? What about old data? And so we modified our policy. Of course, if you need data that's from 40 years ago, they'll ensure that data is provided to you in an accessible format if you need it in an accessible format. But really what we're looking at is ensuring that everything today is accessible and moving forward that everything is accessible. So how do we get there? Well, a lot of training. We need to ensure that all state staff or state staff that create artifacts know how to create accessible Word documents, accessible Excel documents, and accessible PowerPoint presentations. So there's a lot of training that we're developing and that we're working to develop. We need to ensure that agencies understand what an accessible website means and that the developers who are working on those websites understand accessibility. So we partner with vendors. We have a great vendor in Washington State called Aeronautics. The owner, president of the company, is also a university professor who teaches user-centered design. And my agency actually partnered with Aeronautics for the redesign of our website recently. You'll notice our new logo. That is a product that came out of that Aeronautics project. And they helped us understand accessibility from a user-centered design process. And user-centered design puts the user in the center of your project. And so user-centered design is all about accessibility for everyone. So I'm a big fan of user-centered design now. I also want to share that accessibility conference that started out really small last year sold out. And I was incredibly excited this year at the board retreat when the IPMA board voted and agreed to make the Accessibility Matters event one of our premier events. We only have 2 other premier events, so this is a big deal. And that means the Accessibility Matters conference will outlive my time on the board. So when I leave the board, someone else will continue on that conference. So incredibly excited. Thank you. So one of the key takeaways that I really want to bring to light is while one person can make a difference, collaborating takes what's possible to a whole new level. And I am a big fan of Helen Keller. And Helen Keller has a quote that I use often: "Alone we can do so little. Together we can do so much." And I so believe in the power of collaboration, just from what I've learned from Betsy, from what I've learned from many of you. I love to collaborate. So if we're not already connected, find me on LinkedIn, look me up in the CSUN directory. I would love to connect. I would love to collaborate because we can learn so much working together. So, take advantage of all the CSUN networking opportunities. That was something that I've tried to do. I see a lot of people that I have met in the audience. Thank you for being here. And one of the things that Betsy is always saying is that some of the most important or relevant ideas may come from those in different public and industry sectors. So look for the similarities in our challenges, whether you're in the private sector, the public sector, the federal government, state government. We all have similar challenges. Let's figure out where we can collaborate and make each other stronger.
Excellent, Mary. And then just develop your community of resources. Start here, build upon what you have already, but again, we're really big fans of not reinventing the wheel. And there's so much that one can take and run with. And looking at Mary as an example herself in such a short period of time, making these huge changes that started as seeds, but they've really, really grown into something amazing. And I'm trying to do a tree analogy for Washington State, but anyway, it fell short. The logo that Mary was describing is really cool because it's like an outline sketch of evergreen trees. And I think that represents so much more than the what it appears to represent, and it is the culture, it is the connection to environment, and it is, as they said, the investment on diversity and equity and inclusion and accessibility, so that's great. International partners, again, the similarities vastly outweigh your differences. So getting different perspectives and even the way that our international friends approach these problems and hold meetings or don't hold meetings, it takes a global village, and we've learned so much. So with that, we do have just a few minutes left, and we'd love to hear if there's any feedback from you or question for either Mary and I or Owen. And thank you.
Do we have a mic runner?
Yeah, is there a mic runner?
Yeah,
all right.
there we go.
Oh, all right.
So, question in the middle?
In the middle, I believe, yeah.
As government agencies, do you ever get pushback if you try to go beyond what is actually required by the law?
Oh, that's a really good question. And that was one of the challenges I had when I met with the state CIOs that had voted against the accessibility policy. One of the concerns that I heard was, well, I actually had some pretty ardent people who said, I will never support your policy because if we ask for more than what the federal government requires, it will open us up to lawsuits. And my argument was, you don't stop doing the right thing just because you're afraid of getting sued.
And great. And let me answer that from a federal perspective. I would be very happy if we were in the situation where we had opportunities to go beyond. What we really are looking at is consistent focus and enforcement of ensuring that the technology that we buy and build for the federal government is accessible. And there are so many roadblocks thrown in the way. And prior to the past few months, I mean, this has been the challenge since that law is in place. So I think with the resources that have been assigned, and they're very minimal, that are really focused at doing this, I think the best we can always strive to see. But just because you meet minimum accessibility standards, it doesn't mean that the products are really that usable. They could not be, there's always room for improvement. But again, that's where your industry partnership is really critical, because unless you're the developer, and I think the more you talk with those in your ecosystem, and whether that be the technical experts, the one with the requirement that's being fulfilled, and in our case, maybe a mission manager or something, the acquisition people, and then the companies providing the products, the more you actually communicate with each other, you're just gonna get that better design. And that just improves things overall. Really quick case, I don't know how many of you have heard about Owl Labs, or you've seen the hybrid meetings. When I saw one on the show, Bob Hart's Abishola, it really tickled me because it turned out that company was headquartered in Maryland. And I didn't know this, but we were asking for an accessibility conformance report. And again, kind of the pandemic being a breeding ground for, hey, how do we conduct meetings differently? How do we do these hybrid environments? You had a lot of players entering the space, but here they started emerging because of their product as one of the leaders, and they worked with us and created a really great report, and that kind of set the stage for the other companies. We would say, hey, you're not the only one in this space doing this or with a report. There's the competition now to make it not only a great product and at a good price point, but to make it accessible. But I think in our little way, we consider that's going above and beyond what was intended, but that's just driving value for the American people and beyond. But excellent question, thank you. Couple more, I don't know if there's time. Is there time for one more?
Sure.
So
Two?
I am also training in my state on digital accessibility, and I'm wondering, how did you track the your outcomes and the impact of all of your accessibility efforts across your state?
Great question. And we are just starting down this path. I will share with you, when I say the stars have aligned, they really aligned. Our previous governor, before he left office, I'm sure it was in partnership with the new governor, given how close it was to when he was leaving, did an executive order to increase the hiring of people with disabilities in Washington state government. So that executive order helped lay a foundation. So our Department of Enterprise Services manages training for the state workforce. The person in charge of the state learning management system has taken on the project to help us locate the courses that are going to be required by state employees. And we're just now developing that plan. In fact, I got an email yesterday from an accessibility advocate who's a member of that community of practice who has done amazing work on developing the plan and trying to figure out, how are we going to track this? How are we going to measure our success? We're not there yet, but keep in contact with me and I can share what we develop.
Great.
Awesome.
I think, yeah. No, I thought I saw one other hand, but no, one.
Oh.
Okay, do we, maybe time for two? If they kick us out, they'll kick us out, but I'll keep going. Yeah, back here, if there's a mic, or, and then this.
Let the mic go. No more mics. Oh, we were cut off.
We were cut off.
When I worked on the VA draft law harmonization, we had a policy of accessibility beyond compliance, and frankly, make it more accessible and compliant, because who's going to check?
Yes.
Great point. Please feel free to come on up. We'll be here till they kick us out of the room, and then you can stalk us. It works. And then, thank you.
Thank you.